England, 1066, a land on the edge of a storm. For decades, the Anglo-Saxon kings had ruled, a dynasty forged in blood and held together by sheer will. But the line of heritage was faltering. King Edward, known as the Confessor, was childless and frail. His reign, a long summer of peace, was drawing to a close, and with no clear heir, the wolves were beginning to circle. England, rich and fertile, was a prize worth fighting for, a jewel in the crown of any would-be king. And in the courts of Europe and the long halls of the North, ambitious men watched and waited and sharpened their steel. Across the water in Normandy, Duke William was one such man. He was the descendant of Viking raiders, a warrior duke who had clawed his way to power in a land notorious for its brutal politics. He was tough, shrewd, and utterly ruthless. William claimed that King Edward, his distant cousin, had once promised him the throne of England. A promise made years ago, a promise he intended to collect. He saw England not just as a prize, but as his birthright, a destiny foretold. He began to gather a fleet, a massive invasion force the likes of which hadn't been seen in generations. He rallied his barons, promising them land and titles in a new, conquered kingdom. For William, this was more than a war, it was a crusade, blessed by the Pope himself. His ambition was boundless, and his gaze was fixed firmly across the narrow sea. But William wasn't the only one with a claim. In the frozen north, another contender sharpened his axe. This was Harold Sigurdsson, known to history as Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. He was a living legend, a true Viking of the old school, a man who had fought his way from the frozen wastes of Norway to the glittering courts of Constantinople, serving as a high-ranking mercenary in the elite Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor. He had seen more battles, won more gold, and spilled more blood than any two kings combined. Now, as the undisputed king of Norway, he turned his eyes west. He, too, had a claim to the English throne, a flimsy one based on an old, forgotten treaty, but a claim was all he needed. For a man like Hardrada, a claim was simply an excuse to do what he did best, conquer. He assembled his own great fleet, gathering thousands of Viking warriors, hungry for glory and plunder. The last great Viking invasion was about to be unleashed, and what of England itself? As King Edward lay on his deathbed in January 1066, he made one final, fateful decision. He named his successor, not the Duke of Normandy, nor the King of Norway, but the most powerful man in his own kingdom, Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex. Harold was English, a seasoned politician, and a proven military commander. He was the people's choice, the man who had effectively ruled England in the king's name for years. Upon Edward's death, the English council, the Witan, wasted no time. They acclaimed Harold as king, and he was crowned in Westminster Abbey the very next day. King Harold Godwinson now held the throne, but he knew his grip was fragile. He stood between two of the most formidable warlords in Europe, a Saxon king caught between a Norman hammer and a Viking anvil. The new king immediately marched his army to the southern coast, staring out at the English Channel, waiting for William's sails to appear on the horizon. One throne, three kings, a collision of worlds was inevitable. The Norse, the Normans, and the Anglo-Saxons were on a path to a single, bloody point in history. The long summer of peace was over. The winds of war were blowing, and 1066 was destined to become the year that would forge the future of England in fire and blood. The fate of a nation would be decided not by diplomacy or by lineage, but by the clash of swords and the courage of men on the battlefield. Who would be the last king standing? The stage was set for one of the most dramatic and consequential conflicts in all of history.
History isn't just what happened, it's what was hidden. Welcome to the Chrono Archives, where lost empires rise again, forgotten legends speak, and ancient truths are brought back to life. From world-shaping history and powerful myths to legendary rulers and timeless civilizations, every story here is carefully uncovered, deeply researched, and cinematically told. The past is calling, will you answer? Subscribe and journey through time, one unforgettable chronicle at a time.
In the mid-11th century, the Kingdom of England stood at a precipice. The death of King Edward the Confessor in January 1066 left a power vacuum that threatened to shatter the nation as fragile peace. Childless and devout, Edward had failed to produce a clear heir, leaving the throne vulnerable. This succession crisis ignited the ambitions of three powerful men, each believing the crown was their rightful destiny. First was Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex, the most powerful and influential nobleman in England. As Edward's brother-in-law and right-hand man, he was the choice of the Witenagemot, the Council of England's leading men. His claim was one of proximity, power, and popular support within the kingdom. Across the English Channel, William, the formidable Duke of Normandy, watched with keen interest. A distant cousin of Edward, William asserted that the late king had promised him the throne years earlier. This claim, he argued, was absolute and had been divinely sanctioned. And from the cold north, Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway, looked south. A legendary Viking warrior, his claim was rooted in an old agreement between his predecessor and a previous king of England. For Hardrada, England was the ultimate prize to complete a lifetime of conquest. The stage was set for a monumental clash of wills. Within hours of Edward's death, Harold Godwinson moved with decisive speed. Recognizing the immediate threat from his rivals, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, a bold and calculated maneuver to solidify his position. The coronation was a rushed affair, a display of political urgency. The sight of Harold, adorned with the royal regalia, sent a clear message of defiance to his continental challenger. For William of Normandy, this was an act of profound betrayal. William's fury was matched only by his ambition. He publicly declared that Harold had broken a sacred oath. According to the Norman account, Harold had once been shipwrecked on the Norman coast and, as William's guest prisoner, had sworn on holy relics to support William's claim to the English throne. Whether this oath was given freely or under duress, its violation gave William a powerful moral and religious justification for war. He masterfully used this narrative to rally his barons, promising them land and titles in a conquered England. More crucially, he sought and secured the blessing of the Pope, who sent a papal banner to sanctify the invasion. This transformed William's venture from a mere dynastic dispute into a holy crusade. Across Normandy, shipyards bustled with activity. Forests were felled to build a massive invasion fleet, while blacksmiths forged armor and weapons for an army of knights, archers, and foot soldiers, all preparing to cross the Channel. But before William could launch his invasion, England was attacked from another direction. In late September, Harald Hardrada of Norway, allied with Harold Godwinson's own exiled brother, Tostig, landed in the north. Their massive Viking army sailed up the River Ouse and crushed the initial resistance from the northern earls at the Battle of Fulford. The city of York surrendered, and it seemed the Viking king was on the verge of claiming the north of England. Upon hearing the news, King Harold Godwinson demonstrated his formidable leadership. He gathered his housecarls, his elite professional soldiers, and marched his army north at astonishing speed, covering nearly 200 miles in just 5 days. On the 25th of September, he achieved total surprise, catching the Norwegian army unprepared at Stamford Bridge. The battle was a savage and bloody affair. The Vikings, caught without their full armor, fought with desperate ferocity, but were ultimately overwhelmed. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson were slain, and the Norwegian army was annihilated. It was a stunning and decisive victory for the English king, but it came at a great cost. His army was exhausted, battered, and far from the southern coast where a new threat was about to emerge. Just 3 days after the triumph at Stamford Bridge, the winds in the English Channel, which had held William's fleet in port for weeks, finally turned favorable. On the 28th of September, William of Normandy's invasion force landed unopposed at Pevensey Bay on the southern coast of England. The Normans disembarked with chilling efficiency knights, war horses, archers, and engineers. They immediately set about securing their beachhead, constructing a prefabricated wooden castle to establish a fortified base. William's army began to raid the surrounding countryside, a deliberate strategy to draw Harold south and force a confrontation on ground of William's choosing. When news of the Norman landing reached Harold in the north, he was faced with an impossible choice. Despite his army's exhaustion, he had no option but to turn them around and march south once more. Gathering fresh but inexperienced levies along the way, he covered the 250 miles back toward the coast in little over a week. On the evening of October 13th, Harold's army arrived and took up a strong defensive position atop a ridge, known today as Senlac Hill, about 7 miles from William's camp. On the morning of October 14th, 1066, the fate of England was decided. The Battle of Hastings began. Harold's army formed an imposing shield wall along the crest of the hill. This tightly packed formation of men, with their interlocking shields and long spears, was a near-impenetrable defensive tactic, especially against cavalry. William's army advanced uphill to meet them. The battle raged for hours. The Norman assault came in 3 waves. First the archers, whose arrows largely flew harmlessly over the top of the shield wall, then the infantry, who were repulsed by the disciplined English defense, and finally the knights, whose cavalry charges were broken against the unyielding wall of shields and spears. The English held firm, inflicting heavy casualties on the attackers. At a critical moment, a rumor spread through the Norman ranks that William had been killed. Panic began to set in. In a display of bold leadership, William rode along his lines, lifting his helmet to show his face and rally his troops. It was then that the Normans employed a cunning and deadly tactic, the feigned retreat. Twice, Norman knights charged the shield wall and then pretended to flee in disarray. Believing the enemy was breaking, undisciplined elements of the English broke formation and pursued them down the hill, only to be surrounded and cut down by the Norman cavalry. While the core of the shield wall remained intact, these breaches weakened it. As dusk began to fall after nearly a full day of brutal combat, the battle reached its climax. The relentless Norman assaults had taken their toll. Then, a final volley of arrows rained down on the English lines. According to tradition, one of these arrows struck King Harold in the eye, mortally wounding him. With their king fallen and their ranks depleted, the English resistance finally broke. The shield wall collapsed, and the remaining housecarls were surrounded and slaughtered as they made their last stand around their king's body. The battle was over. William was victorious. In the days that followed, the Norman Duke consolidated his power with ruthless efficiency. He marched eastward, securing key coastal ports and terrorizing the local population into submission. Villages were burned, and resistance was brutally crushed. The English nobility was in disarray, their leadership shattered on the battlefield of Hastings. While some pockets of resistance attempted to rally around another claimant, Edgar the Theling, their efforts were futile. William's army advanced in a great, looping march around London, systematically cutting it off and demonstrating that no corner of the kingdom was safe. Faced with the inevitable, the remaining English lords, including Edgar, rode out from London and submitted to William. His path to the throne was now clear. On Christmas Day, 1066, less than 3 months after landing at Pevensey, William, Duke of Normandy, was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, the same church where Harold had been crowned at the start of the year. The ceremony itself was marred by chaos when the Norman guards outside, mistaking the shouts of acclamation for an uprising, set fire to nearby houses. But the act was done. A Norman now sat on the English throne. A new era had begun, one that would fundamentally and irrevocably transform the language, culture, and governance of England forever. Dawn breaks over Senlac Hill. The mists of an English autumn cling to the ground, veiling the ghosts of yesterday. Here, on this quiet field, a kingdom was lost and won. Abandoned shields lie like fallen moons in the dew-soaked grass, their painted dragons and crosses now meaningless. Broken banners, once proud symbols of Saxon loyalty, are tangled in the thorny brush, their colors bled by the rain. Countless arrows, fired with hope and desperation, now stand like a silent, iron harvest in the earth. The crows have had their fill. The air, once thick with the screams of men and the clash of steel, is now filled only with the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. A new silence has fallen over England, a silence heavy with change. From the ashes of this conflict, a new order rises, etched in stone and steel. Across the green landscape, the angular, imposing shapes of Norman keeps begin to scar the skyline. These are not the wooden halls of the Saxons. They are fortresses, built to dominate, to watch, to control. Below them, in the humble waterland daub towns, life goes on, but it is a life forever altered. The familiar sounds of Old English are now punctuated by the sharp, foreign cadence of Norman French. In the great halls where Saxon lords once held court, new masters now sit. Their armor is different, their customs strange, their language a barrier. They look out upon the land, not as stewards, but as conquerors. The old England of mead halls and fireds is fading, becoming a memory whispered by the hearthside. In the quiet solitude of candlelit scriptoriums, another conquest is underway. Monks, their faces illuminated by the flickering flame, bend over parchment. With careful strokes of the quill, they rewrite history. Saxon chronicles are amended, lineages are redrawn, and land charters are reinscribed with new, foreign names. The Doomsday Book, a vast and meticulous inventory of a conquered nation, takes shape. Every field, every pig, every person is accounted for, their worth assessed by their new masters. The language of the law, of the court, and of God is changing. Latin and French supplant the tongue of Alfred the Great. An entire culture is being overwritten, page by painstaking page, ensuring that the Norman claim is not just enforced by the sword, but enshrined in the word. The Anglo-Saxon lords, the thanes and ealdormen who once ruled this land, are now ghosts in their own homes. Some fell at Hastings, their names joining the long list of the valiant dead. Others tried to resist, their rebellions brutally crushed in the north and the fens. Many have fled, seeking exile in the courts of Scotland or Denmark, hoping for a return that will never come. Those who remain are stripped of their titles and lands, their power broken. They watch as Norman knights, granted estates for their service, take their place. A whole aristocracy is dispossessed, fading into the shadows of history, their stories becoming tales of a lost golden age. In a single year, England's crown changed hands, but its language, its laws, and its rulers would never be the same. The old bloodlines were severed, and a new dynasty was forged in the fire of conquest. The scene settles in Westminster Abbey, rebuilt and reconsecrated. The air is thick with incense and the solemn chant of monks. Seated upon the stone of Scone, on the throne of England, is William, the bastard, the Conqueror. His face is like stone, unreadable, his eyes fixed on a future only he can see. He wears the crown of Edward the Confessor, but it rests on a head that has seen the horrors of battle and the cold calculus of power. He is no longer just a Duke of Normandy, he is a king, forged in blood and ambition. The great church bells of London begin to toll, their deep, resonant peals echoing across the city and out into the countryside. Each chime marks the end of an era and the beginning of another. It is the sound of a new England, a nation irrevocably bound to the continent, its destiny now intertwined with that of its Norman masters. The camera slowly pulls back, leaving the silent, stone-faced king alone with his new kingdom, the tolling bells a solemn testament to the price of a crown.
As we close this chapter of the Chrono Archives, remember, the past is never truly gone. It waits patiently in the shadows of forgotten ruins, in the echoes of ancient voices, and in the timeless lessons that still guide us today. It waits to be remembered by curious minds like yours. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the annals of time. If today's exploration of lost civilizations, mythical legends, or historical enigmas ignited your passion for the past, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your favorite moment or what you'd love to see next, and most importantly, subscribe to the Chrono Archives and continue the journey through time. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode where we unearth buried secrets, decode ancient mysteries, and bring history's greatest stories back to life. Together, we'll keep the flame of the past burning bright. Until next time, fellow time travelers, keep questioning, keep discovering, and keep remembering. The Chrono Archives, where the past lives forever.